Father, Son, and Violin. A personal life story tells the vivid of Mao's China. Daniel Olson Chen. Dedicated to my parents and all of their generation.
Special acknowledgements.
My special thanks to Ms. Mercedes Larbenz. Without her encouragement and inspiration, hard work in editing, artwork and her publishing assistance, this book would never have been made public. Father, Son, and Violin. Chapter 20, The First Return to My Homeland in the Early 90s, 3. 1. Farewell Concert in my hometown Changsha. After having settled down the matter of Chu Xiaolin, I felt my heart become much lighter. At the same time, Marianne completed her job handover to her successor at the university and came to Changsha to visit my father. I asked Danson to pass the message to Father that a Norwegian guest named Marianne was waiting for his interview. Father answered immediately that to receive a foreign guest in a hospital corridor would cause international confusion and give a bad impression. The party was working on ways to get him into a senior cadre's ward, therefore, until then, Miss Marianne could take a good rest for a few days or go around taking a good look at the enormous change to our great socialist country after the great, glorious, and always correct Chinese Party's open door and reform policy. Honestly, I myself didn't think it would be a great idea to let Marianne see my father in a hospital corridor either. It was, after all, not a great, glorious, nor correct thing to do. So, I asked Marianne whereabouts she would like to go and what she would like to do. Marianne answered that there was
nowhere and nothing in particular. If Father is unable to see me for a while, why don't we pay some visits to the places where you grew up?
I thought that was a great idea too, especially to take a beautiful Western girl around, letting people know the blonde was my woman. How much honorable face I could gain. So I took Marianne, starting from my kindergarten, elementary school, middle school, then to Changsha Construction Company, Hunan Beijing Opera, up to the Hunan Radio and Television Orchestra. Sure enough, wherever we went, we received warm receptions. Of course, I understood that 90% of all the warm receptions were for the foreign guest Marianne. The visiting ended within 2 days. Then there was nothing more to do. By chance, at that time some old violin friends and former colleagues made a request. They would like to listen to me play that old precious Italian violin that I brought with me everywhere in China. That made me particularly excited. Having taken all the trouble to bring such an expensive Italian violin to my hometown, it would be a waste if I didn't show off a bit. So I found my old partner pianist Dandan, not blood-related but a sworn sister, and the two of us hastily rehearsed a little. Next, we rented a rather luxurious nightclub. When I went to inspect the site I felt that the place might be too big for a private party. I was afraid too few people in that vast space would make the atmosphere of the party a little too lonely. However, in Changsha, a city not that big, the news of my giving a private concert party spread very quickly. More and more people sent me messages saying that they would like to come. The day before the party it was in the Hunan Provincial Major newspaper. When the time came, I went into the nightclub and oh my God. Never mind seats, the whole place was packed with people everywhere, it wasn't even easy to stand. I was particularly touched as my violin teacher Li, the one who first taught me violin in the church, led dozens of children forming a string orchestra, playing for the opening. Evidently, Teacher Li no longer needed to keep teaching violin secretly. I borrowed the opportunity while the children were playing to take a look at the audience. Besides neighbors I grew up with, my former schoolmates, working colleagues from various units, and their spouses and children were all there. The rest, at least half of the people, I didn't know. Of all those among the crowd, my eyes fixed on my former teacher Gua. When she noticed I was looking at her, she waved dismissively, meaning, "Don't bother to come forward and greet her, just prepare for the concert." I was bursting, elated by thinking about how if I had not met teacher Gua, I wouldn't have gone to study in Shanghai and I definitely wouldn't be here tonight. To put it in another way, I would have to come to places like this every night to play the violin for money, in nightclubs. So I decided, after the concert, I would talk to my teacher to show my nostalgia and gratitude for all she had done for me. But after the show, in front of piles of flowers left for me by different people and a queue waiting for my autograph and to have photos taken with me, I felt my bones were so light that I could float. I was just too distracted with the excitement to remember I should talk to teacher Gua after the show. I had no idea what kind of impression I left on people. My expensive Italian violin, my dressed-up, white dress shirt and black bow tie, like the old gentleman in front of KFC, and my Western re-educated way of playing. Yet I knew that my personal feelings and satisfaction had reached the highest climax. Unfortunately, that mood didn't last long, as Danson found a small note on a flower. In the note was teacher Gua's handwriting. "Not bad, but I expected you to be much better." I got very upset reading this. I crumpled it in frustration. "My dear teacher, what more do you expect? An Oscar, Nobel Prize, or Olympic medal?" There was something that puzzled me very much from time to time. As I mentioned before, I just didn't understand why teacher Gua expected so much from me. We all knew she had a very talented son, a genius violinist. That was the reason she resigned from the position as concertmaster of the Hunan Orchestra and concentrated on teaching her son to be a world-class violinist. Nevertheless, I was strongly stimulated by teacher Gao and I again made up my mind. Next concert, I would make it bigger, make an enormous concert, great enough to impress teacher Gua. However, I never imagined that this very casual, rushed private party would be my farewell concert, if not lifelong, at least for the next 10 years. Two, Father's farewell to the hospital corridor at last. After my party concert, Father was moved into an individual room of a high-rank cadre's ward, specially arranged by Ma Xiaomao's father-in-law, the Premier Liu. I took Marianne to see Father there. Seeing Marianne, a foreign guest, but his daughter-in-law, Father made an effort to sit up in the bed, revealing a diplomatic kind of smile from his iron face. He put in his dentures and official-like, said a few not-so-fluent words in English to express his welcome and then asked Marianne whether she was used to Changsha food. Learning that Marianne did not eat meat, Father immediately turned from an official into a parent, quickly ordering Panjie, in Chinese, the big sister, from now on I also call her Panjie, to find a good vegetarian restaurant in town for Marianne. That explains the Chinese old culture. For the masses, food is above all. However, something Father didn't know was, the most frightening word for Marianne in China was, eat. In order to show off my English, I deliberately talked a lot with Marianne in front of Father. Father, as a former university student of English literature, seemed indeed impressed, which made me feel truly great and satisfied for quite a while. Marianne said almost nothing, keeping very quiet, listening to the father and son, until the interview was about over. Marianne suddenly said to Father in Chinese, "Hao xiao 11, bu yao rang nir zi wei nin dan sin, take good care of yourself, please don't make your son worry about you." Not only Father, but also all of the people present, Pangaea and nurses, were shocked. Naturally, who would expect a blonde Western girl's pronunciation of Mandarin Chinese to be as good, if not better, than all of the Chinese people present?
You don't need to worry about me,
said father, removing his dentures. I suppose he wasn't so comfortable, and then stammered something. Hastily, Pangaea walked us out of the room. I asked,
Pangaea, what did he say?
This time, I intentionally addressed Pangaea loudly and clearly, indicating my change of attitude towards her. She was, of course, very pleased to hear that. But to my question, she only smiled bitterly and said,
What else can Baba say? All the same old stuff, such as no need to worry about him. He can always rely upon his Communist Party and the Chinese government.
Right after that, Pangaea made a funny face behind Marianne, and in order not to let Marianne understand, she said to me in Changsha dialect,
Rely upon party and government, all words and words only. When it comes to reality, for instance, often I went to father's unit for help but couldn't even find the one who was in charge.
After my continued questioning, Pangaea had to tell me the truth. The truth was, Danson simply didn't tell father that it was me who found a back door to get him out from the corridor of a general sick house into a room of the high-rank cadre's ward. Instead, he told father that it was his party and government that gave him special care. That touched my father very much, saying that he had worked for the party and government all his life and finally received such an honorable result. That proved the party's warmth and the superiority of the socialist system. And at the same time, mother also thought all her effort of bring gifts to the Premier Lu finally brought good result.
If he didn't know it was my hard work and ability to cause all these things to happen, didn't I do all this for nothing?
I said using a half-joking tone, although my feeling was sincere.
We will tell him later. This is a promise. But meanwhile, the most important thing is to let him rest well.
Pangaea patted me on the shoulder to comfort me, and to show her closeness to me at the same time. All right now, I have proven my ability and resolved the room problem for father, flaunted my good English in front of him, helped Jiang Langsha escape his lifelong burden while at the same time adding new content and meaning to Uncle Feng's life, taken my Western woman Marianne around, from my kindergarten to my last work unit, and last but not least, or should I say most importantly, I showed off my expensive old Italian violin to a lot of people in my hometown. I could claim the first trip back to China was a brilliant, almost perfect victory. Following father's order, Danson found a very decent vegetarian restaurant in town and booked an individual room with a full table of dishes. When it was time to go, Marianne suddenly said,
I don't feel so well today. You go alone, but don't forget to bring me a loaf of bread, please.
How could that be tolerated? The whole table of dishes is specifically ordered for you by my father, our father, I mean. In order to make everybody happy, you have to go regardless of how you feel.
I dragged Marianne out, almost by force, and went on with my comments.
You foreigners. Yeah, really selfish, only thinking of your own feelings and not the others.
My comments about foreigners upset Marianne. She said angrily,
You Chinese people are the ones only thinking of your own interest and pleasure, never caring for how others feel. Selfish.
Danson and his wife had put all of their effort into carefully selecting a whole table of the best vegetarian dishes, at least the best they could think of. In the end, to be called selfish, what would people think about it? This kind of difficult to explain conflict occurred quite often in everyday life between us. I got used to it, but how could I explain it to father? After being persuaded in every way possible, Marianne finally agreed to go with me under one condition.
Never force me to eat anything at the table.
How could guests not be forced to eat in front of a Chinese table? In reality, Marianne was with tears, crying for mercy at the table, begging I not force her to eat any more. As Marianne didn't eat more anyway, the vegetarian food had lost its original meaning. The rest of the people simply put a hot pot on the table. In it, a big leg of dog meat. When Marianne saw that she was so horrified, she threw out everything from her stomach that had just been forced in with so much effort. Back at the hotel, Marianne was lying on the bed discussing what we should do next. What she meant was going to the United States. But I thought she was asking me about the next day. I said,
Tomorrow we could take a walk along the streets, get some small gifts that you like.
How about the day after tomorrow?
She asked.
Let's wait for tomorrow to think of something about the day after tomorrow, all right?
I was a little too tired to go on with the discussion. Marianne said, with a very quiet voice, as if talking to herself,
That's a pure waste of time. If you want to spend more time with your family, I understand. If that's the case, I could probably use this chance to take a research trip to Yunnan to see the Mozo minority people.
What? Go there again? Didn't I accompany you there once before? You already know the people there look almost the same as the rest of the Chinese, only not as good looking. The lake is pretty but not worth seeing twice, I mean going such a long distance.
I yawned. The following of what Marianne said was all gibberish to me.
Wake up.
Marianne pushed me.
Can't you talk about the matriarchal social system of Mozo people tomorrow?
I rolled over and went on with my dream.
No, it's a phone call from your family.
Marianne pushed me harder to wake me up. The phone call was from my younger brother Danhen's wife. She asked me to go to Danson's home immediately, as everyone in the family was there waiting to have an urgent discussion with me.
What could be so urgent?
I said impatiently.
Father wants to move out from the high-rank cadres ward.
My pretty sister-in-law said.
Who would dare move father out?
Hearing that, I was completely awake and asked anxiously.
No one, it's Baba himself who wants to move out.
Sister-in-law explained again. That's odd. I'd gone through so much trouble to get the old man out of a dirty, noisy, dark, crowded corridor and into a nice clean quiet single room of a high-rank hospital. Why the hell does he want to move out? I apologized to Marianne and asked her to go to bed if she likes and not to wait for me. Hastily I went to Danson's home. 3. An old revolutionary encounters a new problem. On my way rushing to Danson's home, I couldn't figure out why it was my little sister-in-law who called me, when usually, if not Danson, it would be Mimi. However, the most puzzling question was why father wanted to move out of the high-rank cadres ward. I certainly couldn't imagine that before the phone call from my little sister-in-law, there had been a hot discussion between all the family members. The topic, of course, revolved around father's new problem. This time the problem was not that we couldn't get father into a room at a hospital, but to the contrary. Father insisted on moving out of the room where he already was, in the hospital. The trouble started when father noticed that the name tag hanging on his bed remained, Minister Wu. What bothered him more was that all the nurses kept calling him Minister Wu, even after father repeatedly corrected them by telling them his correct title should be, Deputy Commissioner Chen. Under pressure, Pangaea had to tell father the truth, that the bed actually belonged to Minister Wu. It was his second son who conquered all the obstacles and finally found the back door to manage his lying in Minister Wu's bed. Therefore, all the nurses had received orders from Premier Liu that, in order not to reveal the secret, no matter who is in that bed, keep calling him Minister Wu. Of course, Pangaea told the truth partly to keep her promise of letting father know that it was my effort and achievement that got him in a room and out of the corridor. When father learned the truth, particularly the fact that it was his second son who found the back door, he insisted on moving out. Saying that to accept a back door contradicted his beliefs and principles as a revolutionary, father stressed.
If a person gives up his beliefs and principles before death, it would be a negation of what he has been fighting for all his life. Being alive like that would be meaningless. As a revolutionary, a meaningless life is the same as being dead.
Seeing Pangaea with a long face, which she rarely showed, Father explained patiently.
Everyone is going to die anyway, the only difference is how and when. My hope was to let the hospital use my body for scientific research so that I could make good use of my flesh and blood as a final contribution to the country's medical project. I thought to move me here was arranged by the party and organization in order to receive better tests. That's why I was so pleased. In a word, I'm a party member. I'll follow the party's arrangement regardless if it's in a room of a high-rank cadre's ward or in the corridor of a general hospital. I will obey with no complaint.
Everyone was upset, puzzled and troubled by Father's attitude in this matter, except Pangaea. However, I think even I understood more about Father than Pangaea. I knew that besides his adhering to revolutionary principle in not accepting a backdoor, the more important factor was that he was not willing to accept a mercy from his second son, or let my conspiracy of showing off my ability succeed. In other words, he would rather die than be a loser in the hands of his opponent, which was me, his second son. This was why, when he said, "It's him again, doing all those things," my pure and innocent life was almost stained at the last moment. He was particularly emotional. Under Father's strong will and insistence, the family had no choice but to move him out of the high-rank cadre's ward. To move out of a room was easy. The problem was move where, as once out of the corridor, he couldn't get back in. That was why everyone was at Danson's home and couldn't figure out a way to deal with this new situation. 4. Financial situation of my brother Danson's. Finally out of that nice room at the high-rank cadre's ward, Father had nowhere to go. Therefore Pangaea proposed taking Father home for the time being. As I described before, Danson's home had only 2 rooms, one for the host couple and one for our mother and her grandson. Grandma slept on the sofa, and grandson on the floor. The small, 2-room home was already overcrowded. If Father moved in, where could he be put? It would only work if Danson and his wife slept outside on the open veranda. Dan Hen said with an indication.
If we could buy a commercial flat nearby, that would be the best solution.
My unsophisticated brother Danson didn't get his youngest brother's hint and that the words were for the pretty young wife. Smiling with bitterness, Danson said,
"Talking about nearby, right behind our building there are new apartments for sale. I could even use my working years to get a favorable discount."
The pretty young wife, who also apparently failed to understand what her husband really meant, immediately encouraged Danson.
Why wait? Buy one. What is saving money in the bank for?
Saving money? Where do we have money to be saved?
Pangaea couldn't hold it in.
I'll count every single RMB for you. Danson's month's salary altogether is 2,000 renminbi. That's 24,000 renminbi a year. The sum total wouldn't be enough for our son's education.
Talking as she got herself a pen and piece of paper, she wrote, "No wonder a former accountant."
The annual tuition is 13,000 renminbi. Board living costs at least 700 renminbi per month, 400 RMB a year. To put tuition and living expenses together would be 21,000 renminbi, plus all kinds of unexpected school fees from time to time. In addition, stationery, books, PC, etc. You count if it's enough or not.
Pangaea finished writing and put the paper in front of her young sister-in-law. Probably feeling it wasn't enough, she complained.
That's what your education industry had done for us. When you say industrialization of education, all the oil has to be scraped from every single student, students' parents to be more accurate.
My pretty sister-in-law was working for the City Education Bureau. Holding a position as a middle-rank leader, she, of course, immediately stood up to defend the education industry, claiming,
Nowadays, every working unit is working hard for the economy. Education has always been a blank sheet, but with the high-speed development of our country's economy and consumption, people in the education field are also forced to make money. Now, if not from the students, from where will that fat oil come?
How could you survive with such an unbalanced income?
Dan Hen asked his big brother, rather worried. Brother answered helplessly.
Not dead, proves able to be kept alive.
After Danson's landmark quotation, Pangaea went on with some details.
How do we make our living? We live on my 150 renminbi monthly pension, plus 600 renminbi income from a temporary job. But recently even that 600 are not a guarantee, as I must use so much time taking care of father.
Pangaea changed to a joking tone.
So I say, my brother and sister, I return what you said to me, back to you. What's the use of saving all the money in the bank? Might as well lend it to us to buy a flat.
Danson immediately stopped his wife.
That's something you shouldn't joke about. They have their own lives. They also need to move and pay school fees for their child. Not to mention they have already paid for most of Barbara's nutrition costs.
And every time mother needs presents to give for making connections, the money has also been from Dan Hen's pocket.
The young wife bitterly knocked the head of her husband. Dan Hen thought it was the time to spill it. He gathered the courage to face his wife, who was in charge of the family finances, and said,
In fact, what Pangaea said was not entirely inconsiderable. Our flat truly is not very luxurious but rather livable, for the time being. We could think of lending our deposit to Danson to buy a flat first in order to solve father's problem. We can wait for better chances later.
Before Dan Hen finished, his head received a slap like a volleyball from his wife.
You must be out of your mind. You have two elder brothers in front of you. Why do you need to come out for the role of the protagonist?
How could you call it protagonist? This is our family's affair.
This time Dan Hen's mouth was blocked by the fist of his wife. The wife said to him,
You have no right to open your mouth now. Wait until your earning is half as much as mine.
Said by his wife in this way, Dan Hen could really only shut up. As acrobatics didn't offer a good income, altogether Dan Hen's monthly income was just about 1,000 renminbi. However, thanks to the education industry policy, the young wife received quite a good salary. In addition to her versatile abilities such as giving private lessons and writing teaching method books, she could receive a considerable additional income, gray income, as the Chinese put it. So when we say women's liberation, the key is turning their economic status around, in which women can make the same or more than men. This was the reason the young and little wife could hold her huge husband under her control, completely.
So you tell us, what should we do with father? Throw him in front of the hospital, outside?
Dan Hen said helplessly. Silence, quiet, deadly, nobody had anything to say, even the sound of breathing could be heard. Again, Dan Hen's wife broke the ice.
I say, you Chen brothers, why don't you all ask your second son of the family? Hearing people often say so-and-so's relative is from abroad and brought back many presents for the family, only the second brother of your family brought nothing for me. That made my colleagues laugh at me, saying, it's useless to have a brother-in-law in a foreign country.
To my young and pretty sister-in-law, the brother was only a matter of useful or useless. After listening to the complaints from the sister-in-law, Danson tried to defend me, his brother.
Please don't think that there is gold to pick up everywhere in foreign countries and that anyone can get rich as long as they get out of the country. The people abroad may have their own hardships. For instance, our Danju, we don't really know his financial situation. If he's strong financially, seeing the family situation, he wouldn't sit and do nothing about it. On the contrary, he has said nothing so far. It could mean that his economic situation may not be very good. Therefore, we shouldn't make difficulties for him, but try to understand.
Danson's speech certainly didn't convince the young sister-in-law. Therefore she argued again.
No money? No money, how can he bring a $50,000 violin back home? Ask him to sell that violin. The money should be enough to buy a flat. Or is he bragging and that old ragged thing isn't worth much money at all?
Not waiting for his wife to finish, Dan Hen said heavily.
I'd rather die than beg him for money.
The young wife dug at her husband.
No good at earning money, no good at begging for money. What a useless thing you are.
Then she turned her face to Pangaea, complaining.
You see how unlucky I am, really the worst luck. Couldn't stand the temptation of all his sweet words and unconsciously got in his bed, got on his boat. Now I can only blame myself for being young and naive.
Seeing nobody seemed to want to call me, she sighed again and said,
If you all sit there doing nothing, I'll call. Let me be the wicked one. What's the phone number of second brother?
The above was the dramatic scene that occurred at my brother Danson's home before I went there. When I reached Danson's home, a full table of dishes was waiting for me. I wondered how the Chinese people could eat all around the clock, regardless if it was day or night. Before I started my question, my young sister-in-law told me, the old revolutionary of your family is facing a new problem. After Danson narrated all the trouble, I asked him,
As our family has such a special, difficult situation, couldn't you have a good talk with your work unit to see if they can help solve your housing problem?
Danson smiled bitterly, shook his head meaning my question was totally out of question, therefore unanswerable. Dan Hen looked up at the ceiling exposing some sturdy nose hair. Pangaea was about to make some comments as young sister-in-law stepped forward.
My dear brother, abroad for all those years, how could you talk like an ancient man? At the present time in China, who would expect to get a flat from their working unit? The real estate has long been reformed and today everybody has to buy commercial housing with loans or without.
Pangaea followed, repeating her family financial balance in front of me, bringing the conclusion, it's absolutely impossible for Danson to buy a property with their financial ability, or lack thereof. Therefore, to buy a property all is left to me.
Like a mud Buddha across the river can't ensure their own safety, in addition they very often must help that little girl called Huan Huan.
Dan Hen added.
Huan Huan. Who's that?
I immediately took Dan Hen's conversation, looking at him, hoping this question to be the start of the first dialogue after so many years. But I didn't succeed. As Dan Hen stood up and went out to wash his hands, he excused himself. The following is the Huan Huan story as told by Pangaea. Five, story of a little girl called Huan Huan. Huan Huan was a 6th grade elementary school girl, who happened to be Danson's neighbor. Her parents had a big fight after losing their jobs at the same time and both walked away from the home, leaving Huan Huan alone with her sick 70-year-old grandmother. For more than a year, part of her tuition fees were donated by her classmates and many of her clothes too. The following is a description of what a day was like for Huan Huan. She gets up early in the morning making breakfast and lunch for grandmother as well as her own lunch box for school. In the afternoon, after school, she goes to the market picking up vegetable leaves from the ground. Sometimes, if lucky, she might get a little leftover pork skin, bone, or something from good-hearted meat sellers. After she finishes eating dinner with grandmother, she goes out to help some wealthy classmates do their homework, which becomes her major source of income. Sometimes she gets some small jobs from neighbors, but that she can only do during her sleep time. Hearing that, Dan Hen made a painful comment.
Children from poor families grow fast. What a cruel and ironic pride of society, particularly so many years after the liberation took place in our great country.
But his young wife argued.
Yes, some are poor, but also many are rich. Like a school I know, each class 5 to 10 out of 40 are coming and going in the private cars of their parents. Kids like Juan, picking up vegetable leaves for a living, is after all, a minority.
Among those who can afford to go to school, picking up vegetable leaves for one's living are of course, a minority. Hearing that, I lamented that.
To be able to pick up vegetable leaves and make a living today, what a great leap forward that has taken place in our great country, a progress worthy of intoxication.
I said that remembering the year 1960, never mind picking up the leaves of vegetables, even the leaves of trees, bark and grasses were not easy to get, and that indomitable struggle for survival we fought with that little fat brother, the son of Minister Wang, for the right to cut wild grass for food in a public zone. However, a person or a nation making a vertical comparison with oneself could always result in satisfaction and intoxication. Thinking back to the Stone Age, the Beijing man lived in caves, shouldn't we be fiercely proud and intoxicated? Yet, if making a horizontal comparison with other people or nations, it might not always be the case of pride and satisfaction. For instance, to compare my house in Norway with Danson's home, that 14-inch color TV, it should be said to be gray and yellow TV, the refrigerator that could only be used as a cupboard and the washing machine that could cause an earthquake when used. I felt pressure, or rather a sense of responsibility, perhaps it should be called a sense of being needed. But on the other hand, I have my own life, I have my dream to pursue. How could I give up my dream for others, I mean for the other people in my family, and not go to the United States to pursue my musical studies? Seeing me abstaining from the discussion of buying a new flat, my young sister-in-law got desperate, sarcastically saying,
I always thought the Chen brothers were something, now I'm in the Chen's family and I finally got the truth. The truth is, all 3 brothers put together can't compete with a small wife like me.
Who said that?
Her remark made me furious. How could a big man, 3 big mans, I mean, be pushed against a wall by a little woman? I suddenly felt that to prove to my family I wasn't an ordinary man, but a man with special ability not only in playing the violin but also with the capability of making big money, in one word, to prove that I was the strongest son in Chen's family, was more important than anything else, at least at that very moment. Therefore, evaluating little sister-in-law's prodding tactic, I saw it as an opportunity that I had been searching for many years. An opportunity had finally come to me with the room in the high-rank cadre's ward, but it didn't last long enough, yet this time, an opportunity came that could put me in the role of the strongest and most remarkable son in the family for a long time, if not forever. I immediately asked Danson to get the bag that I had asked him to take care of for me. I took all the traveler's checks, a total of $50,000 and, threw them on the table. That feeling, no need to mention how cool it was. It was after midnight when I went back to the hotel. In order not to disturb Marianne, I tiptoed into the room, but found she was still reading a book about the matriarchal Mozo people. Seeing me come back, she asked a question that she had been waiting to ask me the whole time.
What happened?
Nothing important that you would understand.
I tried to stall, and passed.
Nothing important, which? If you don't tell me, how can you know I won't understand? Try me.
Marianne held fast. It appeared that it wasn't automatic to pass. I had to make a simplified version of what had happened at Danson's home, as simple as possible, especially that $50,000 part. I told her my version in a very relaxed tone. After hearing the story, Marianne said nothing, but her facial expression showed one word: unbelievable. She put her book under the pillow, covered her head with the quilt and went to sleep. I knew she was mad at me, but still made an effort to ease the atmosphere. I pulled the quilt up and asked,
No comments?
Don't bother me, please. I have to get up early in the morning for Yunnan.
Marianne didn't show her face but covered her head even tighter.
What did you say? We go to Yunnan tomorrow? How could you make such a big decision without consulting with me?
Marianne, wow, removed the quilt, shouting at me.
Consult? Do you really find such a word existing in your dictionary? Do you realize what you threw to your family was not just our money, but also our dreams?
Marianne got more and more agitated when she started to talk. She simply got up and started packing her bags.
All right, it's okay to go to Yunnan, but at least give me 1 day to prepare, please.
I knew nothing more I could argue, only make a concession.
Who invited you to go to Yunnan with me?
Marianne turned off all the lights. Suddenly the conversation ended, leaving only pure darkness between us. I knew I had no choice but to accompany Marianne to Yunnan, therefore before dreaming I thought about what I should bring with me for the trip, but after coming from my dreams back to reality, Marianne was gone. Seven, a winter fire. Needing someone to talk to, I made a phone call to Mimi asking her if she could come see me at once. But she told me I had to wait until she was off work. I hung up the phone, not knowing what to do. I was restless when the phone rang again. I knew that Mimi would change her mind, I thought, deliberately picking up the receiver slowly. I said, Mimi.
Sister?
Mimi in Chinese sounds the same as sister.
When did I become your sister?
I recognized that voice, it was Ma Xiaomao's. When one is lonely and isolated, they're not too fussy about whom they talk with. Ma soon came to see me at the hotel. After I narrated the whole story of the night before, the never care much for others Ma expressed her unusual interest and sympathy.
How much does this room cost a day?
Ma said, raising a completely different issue.
What do you mean?
I asked.
You can stay in my place if you like. I mean, your wife's gone, you're only one man. At my place you can cook and have internet access too.
Ma, seeing I winked at her, immediately explained.
Don't get me wrong. You know me. What I meant was, you stay at my place, I stay with my husband's family as I have been doing. So that you can save some money.
I didn't realize that Ma's invitation to stay at her place was because she was afraid I wouldn't honor my promise to help her get out of the country since my father moved out from the high-rank cadre's ward. Saving money, with internet access and cooking facilities, it was indeed very tempting. In addition, staying in someone else's home to pry at others' way of living is also some people's interest. I accepted the invitation, sorted my things, checked out of the hotel and went to Ma's home. Although Ma's home was much better than my brother Danson's, it was a far cry from our schoolmates Wang Shi and Lu Xiaobing's. The room looked a bit messy, books everywhere, but with an atmosphere of a kind of elegance. In fact, I felt quite at home. In a glass cabinet I noticed a violin, and next to the violin was a framed picture of Ma and a handsome young man. No need to ask, that man must be Ma's husband, Mr. Lu Kongkong. I moved half a step forward in order to take a closer look. Hey! Her husband looked a lot like a man, who? I couldn't recall at that very moment. Ma thought I was looking at the violin in the glass cabinet and smiled shamefully.
It's put there more like a decoration. Not a very good violin, certainly in no way compares with your old expensive Italian.
That language took me straight back to the middle school year when I fought with her over who was the better violin player. After all these years the opportunity came to me. I fiercely opened my Italian violin, touched the strings to make some sound and asked,
Would you like to try?
Give me a break. I haven't touched a violin for years.
Seeing me taking the violin out of the case, Ma made a gesture.
Sue, neighbors are having a nap.
What a huge disappointment. But that also reminded me in China how important it was to take a nap and that foreigners would find it hard to understand, except the people in Spain. I opened the refrigerator looking for something to drink, but found almost nothing inside. Ma explained.
As a matter of fact, since Concon passed away, I seldom stay here.
When someone has lost her loved one, the loneliness was not difficult to imagine. But before I could find the most suitable language to comfort her, Ma actually added,
I'm too lazy to cook. To stay with his parents, I need not do any housework.
I shivered, not knowing if it was because of the cold weather or her cold, bold confession. Ma briefly gave me instructions for the computer power supply and kitchen facilities, such as how to use the gas. When she explained the use of electric blankets on the bed, she said,
When you get up from bed, you must turn it off. Nowadays, lots of counterfeit products often cause fires.
She walked towards the door and added,
Here's the key. About lunch, you can make your own or eat out, as you please. When you go out, please lock the door. When I finish work, I'll bring some food back. You can make dinner, or we can do it together.
After that, the door was closed, from outside. Since Ma was so relaxed and casual, I really started to make myself at home. I boiled some hot water and made a bowl of instant noodles for lunch. After that I found nothing else to do. After having lived so many years in a foreign country, I thought I had gotten rid of the habit of napping, but I was wrong, as not long after lunch I started to feel sleepy. I made myself at home again by sleeping in the bed. It was very cold, so I turned on the electric blanket. The bed began to warm up. I had a dream, a daydream, actually a nap dream. In the dream I met Ma's dead husband Lu Kongkong. To my surprise, he was the same person as one of my colleagues at the Hunan Radio and Television Orchestra. I woke up from the dream, looked at the photo again and felt a little uneasy. Then I decided to go out for a walk. There was a small bookstall on the roadside. I stopped, took a look of some odd magazines. Not sure how much time had passed, I heard a fire engine's siren from far to near and nearer, passing me in the direction of Ma's house, one after another. I was a little curious, but still couldn't get my eyes away from a journalist report in a magazine titled, An Odd Case of Virgin Prostitution. I took my time returning to Ma's residence, oh my chairman. God. Heavy smoke hanging in the sky, and fire trucks piled up. I rushed closer. The two-story dormitory building of Ma's that was here a moment ago was gone. Looking at the miserable fire scene, my first reaction was,
My violin!
Then I saw TV reporters interviewing the head of the fire department. The head replied,
Because the rescue was quick and efficient, so basically nobody's dead.
Is it a nobody's dead, or a basically nobody dead?
A reporter asked.
Nobody's dead, basically.
The head of the fire department said again.
What was the cause of the fire?
Another reporter asked.
The cause of the fire is under investigation. From the current situation, we do not exclude the improper use of electrical appliances.
No need to mention that my $50,000 antique Italian violin, as well as all my baggage, in which were some items that had been with me for years, together with all the property of Ma and memories of the first half of her life, regardless old or new, high class or low class, east or west, expensive or cheap, had been equal materials for the fire, and all were gone in that short period of time. All that was left were our 2 lives and what those 2 lives were wearing on their bodies. When my head cooled down, I realized I must go to tell Ma as quickly as I could. Rushing on the road calling for a taxi, I found I didn't have enough money for a taxi. I rushed to a bus station. When I arrived at Ma's working unit, the library of Hunan Medical University, she had left work early. One of her colleagues told me,
She went to a food market. She must have some very important guest coming, for normally she doesn't go to places like food markets.
I was shocked, exhausted, and couldn't walk any further. I went to see Danson. However, my dear brother had no idea why I needed his help to find a room at the most reasonable price, when I rejected a nice room at the guest house of his working unit when I first came. Perhaps he thought I regretted giving him the traveler's checks for the $50,000. However, he asked me only one question, as he already read from my face that something big must have happened.
Where's your luggage?
Hey, never mention that again.
I almost cried. Not long after I got into a cheap room at the guest house, Mimi came to see me. She told me she first went to the hotel and was told I checked out. After I told her what had happened that day, she kept very quiet, only at the end remarking,
If I had known, I would have taken a day off.
Don't ever say that again.
I roared. Mimi wasn't scared, on the contrary, she knew it wasn't the best time to be present. Quietly she disappeared. I was in bed, alone, what had happened in the afternoon, like a movie repeatedly showed on the ceiling. More and more I felt it was time. I had to go looking for Ma Xiaomao, but where? I had to go find her. I got up, just about to go, someone knocked at the door. Believe it or not, it was Mimi, together with Ma Xiaomao and my brother Danson. From their faces there was no doubt they had heard everything about the fire. Silence, nothing but silence. Danson knew there was nothing he could do to help. He gave a hint to Mimi and left Ma and I alone. I was waiting for Ma to burst out, crying or even threaten to hang herself, but beyond my expectation she didn't cry nor say any extreme words. Instead, she opened a food box, said,
Italian pizza, you must not have had anything for supper yet.
Hearing the word Italian reminded me of my violin. I lost control, tears flowing down my nose spraying out. Ma was immediately infected, also consuming a stack of tissue. In order to help my dear readers understand my feelings more, I give the following explanation. For that Italian violin was absolutely not easy to get, for anyone. In fact, it took me many years, traveling to many countries in Europe to find it. To lose this violin meant that the world would never ever hear the unique and extremely beautiful sound of that violin again, the sound not another $50,000 could buy. Really, it was not about the money, at least not only. Let me put it in this way. There are millions of people in the world, but only one out of the millions is your taste and style that you would love with all your heart, and could never be replaced. If you lost this person, how would you feel? When we both calmed down a bit, Ma sighed and said,
Something gone is gone, nothing we can do to bring them back, like my husband, those old photos and diaries.
She looked at the other bed in the room, and went on.
I have no idea how to tell his old Baba, my husband's father. Hey, anyway, I too am homeless and have nowhere to go, have to stay here for the night.
Hearing her comments, I was a little disappointed, for she didn't mention a single word about my violin. We went to bed, separately, leaving only a very faint light on, for we could easily be terrified if the room was too bright or too dark. After a while Ma called me, hello, to see if I went to sleep.
What?
I immediately responded. Ma said,
How come you always bring me bad luck?
I asked back.
How could you say that?
Ma argued.
Forget? Who made all the trouble for me in middle school, finally causing my being sent to Xinjiang after graduation? And this time, we meet only a few days, you see what happened.
Ma made every effort to control her emotions. She changed to a softer tone.
Now I'm cornered and have nowhere to go.
You will have to keep your promise to get me out of the country. The sooner the better.
To get you out won't be a problem. The problem is what to do with you after you're out.
I only need your help getting out. The rest you don't need to worry about. This is an agreement and promise,
she said firmly. In the room next door, someone was playing a tape recording. It was a very popular song by an American, half Chinese, half French, pop star. The song went something like this. Winter fire, you are so cold and I am so hot, so my love for you is like a fire in the winter. Winter fire, winter fire. Hearing the word fire, I couldn't help jumping up and punching the wall. Shut up. The response was a louder, winter fire, winter fire. Seeing me restless in my bed, Ma got up from her bed. She turned off the last light and sat by my side on the bed. She put her hand into the quilt, first touching my chest. As there was no response, she stopped. No one was in a romantic mood, or to her, it may have meant something else. Who knows? Ma slowly moved her hand down, and said, or ordered, or begged.
Bring me out, just get me out.
Next door, the pop song, Winter Fire, went on. I nodded. Her hand stopped there, perhaps she reckoned she had reached her goal. Under extremely abnormal circumstances, sex could function as a kind of effective anesthetic, at least for me at that moment. Yet why did she take the initiative of doing that? To stimulate, comfort, seduce, or to express her determination that she would do anything to go abroad? Or maybe something else much more profound. Hey, as a girl, then a woman like Ma, who never reveals her true feelings, how could I figure out what really was in her mind? Only in reality, after that fire disaster, our relationship had unprecedented variation. After the fire, I was literally penniless, or should I say scentless. A veritable pauper, not even having money to pay for the cheapest room at the cheap guest house, or everyday food, much less a plane ticket to Beijing. To ask brother for money I just gave to the family, I would lose face. To borrow from my rich little sister-in-law would be unthinkable. What should I do, and what could I do? But, nothing to worry about, as the old Chinese saying goes. When a boat reaches a bridge, naturally it would have a pass for the boat to go on. At this critical moment, Mimi handed me 3,000 renminbi. I knew that sum wasn't easy for her to save, and felt somewhat embarrassed. But she said she wasn't going to marry somebody soon, therefore was in no need of the money for the wedding, and if I feel bad about it, I could just borrow it, giving it back to her later, with interest.
I'm responsible for the whole thing too. For if I had taken a day off that morning,
Mimi joked a little. This time I dared not be mad at her, but smiled a little. Yet I knew that smile must look awful, worse than crying. Mimi's offer was like the old Chinese saying, to send carbon to the people in snow. In English it should be, a friend in need is a friend indeed. Yet Mimi was certainly more than a friend. On my way back to Norway, I had completely empty hands, but on my shoulder a tattered violin case, inside, that broken white violin I made when I was little, smashed by father during the Cultural Revolution. Why did I bring that violin's remains to Norway? I could think of all the reasons like it took too much space in Danson's home, or to take a violin with me everywhere had been my habit, or nothing else belongs to me that I could bring except that violin, but all the reasons were excuses. The real meaning behind taking that broken white violin with me to Norway was probably to take my last remaining memory out of the country. Empty-handed, the most painful question at the airport, or immigration was, "Where's your baggage?" But that wasn't the worst, as before going to China, Marianne and I were about to go to the USA, and had both quit our jobs and sold our apartment. All the money we had saved for years was given to my family. Like this, After going back to Oslo and before Marion came back from Yunnan, where should I stay? And what could I eat?